evening. I'm Mayor John Higdon. Welcome to our 5:30 meeting for tonight, February 27, 2023. I'd like to say that Mayor Pro Tem McCool is unable to join us tonight. We're going to start tonight board staff meeting with representatives from the BOC February Institute. Receive a report on affordable housing. Nadine, do you want to introduce? Yes, Dr. Rachel Jackson.
As you said, they're from the Urban Institute. We've got Rachel Jackson, Gabe Baker, and Bill McCoy here from the Urban Institute. They started this study in May of last year and completed it in December. And probably would have presented this before now, but you guys have been really busy since then. So this is the first opportunity that we had. We're really excited about this study. I think just in conjunction with a comprehensive plan, I think this is really important information for that study going forward. So we are excited to hear what they have to say. And I'll let Rachel. Okay, I'm going to let Katie take over now.
And say, you know what?
Hi everyone. I'm Katie Baker here from the Urban Institute presenting the Matthews Housing Needs Assessment. All right, so just a quick overview of who we are as the Urban Institute. We're an applied research and community outreach center at UNC Charlotte. And so we're nonpartisan, and we really kind of talk about issues around social, economic, and environmental challenges facing our communities. Just to introduce you to the project team real quick, I'm Katie Baker. I'm here with my colleagues Rachel Jackson Gordon. She'll be talking more in the second half of this presentation. Ku Zhang is our Director of Community Services today. We also have Bill McCoy, who's a Professor Emeritus. And then I always have to give eternal thanks to my graduate assistant, Providence Adu. So just a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. We'll kind of talk about what the study was and what our research questions were. Then we'll talk about demographics and employment, some of the findings related to housing. All of this are topics we covered in our interim presentation, and so we won't spend too much time there and go over a lot of the qualitative findings that Rachel and Bill found, and we'll finally end with our recommendations. We had 4 research questions. They really covered who, why, and where affordable housing. So who needs affordable housing in Matthews, and how well does the current stock of housing options serve this population? What are the gaps and opportunities? What does affordability mean for the town of Matthews and for towns like Matthews across the country? How do residents understand and describe the need for affordable housing in the town of Matthews? What housing policies and programs in other communities like Davidson could inform the town of Matthews to consider next steps? And then what interconnections between affordable housing, transportation, and land use policies should the town consider developing a future comprehensive plan? So our study had 3 major parts. First was quantitative data collection. So that's where we pulled data from sources like the Tax Parcel Database or the American Community Survey. Rachel and Bill then had a series of key informant interviews and focus groups to help inform our qualitative data collection and analysis. And then we also did a review of recent literature to try and tie all these different data points in with the latest and greatest when it comes to recommendations in the housing world. So first we'll start with demographics and employment. So you might have seen this slide before, we'll go over it again. Matthews is growing. The population was 29,435 in 2020, about 8% in the past 10 years. The pace of growth in Matthews has slowed down. So it grew 23% between 2000 and 2010, down to 8% from 2023, between 2010 and 2020. The pace of growth is slower than it is in Mecklenburg County. Mecklenburg County is still closer to 20% in terms of their growth rate. And we really think the pace of growth in Matthews is tied very closely to saturation of the housing market. Building has slowed down quite a bit. Fewer homes are being built. There's also less annexation happening, so the town boundaries are much more stable these past 10 years than they were the 10 years prior. And even though it stopped growing, Matthews is still much less dense than Mecklenburg County. So Matthews has a population density of about 1,721 people per square mile. Mecklenburg County is about 2,128, so it includes Charlotte and the 6 towns. It's about almost twice as dense as Matthews. The Matthews population is getting older. The population over age 65 increased from 12% to 17% in the past 10 years. Household heads over the age of 60 now make up 40% of households in Matthews. That's up from 30% 10 years ago. 2-person households are the most common in Matthews, 37% of housing. The next most popular, I guess, household size is 4-person at 24%. And then 72% of households are family households, and 23% live alone. And yeah, as we said, most households are 2-person family households at 37%. Next, we'll talk a little bit about employment in Matthews. So most workers who live in, most Matthews workers live places other than Matthews. So only 5%, or 1 in 20 people who work in Matthews also live in Matthews. This percentage is pretty low, even compared to other suburbs in Mecklenburg County. So our last report talking about North Mecklenburg, so the towns of Davidson, Huntersville, and Cornelius, that number is closer to 12%. And so as we discussed last time, these workers are mostly in the service sector, and we saw that some of their wages were on average a little lower. So 60% of the people who work in Matthews make less than $40,000 an hour, or $40,000 per year. I wish it were an hour, right? So we also tried to kind of tie, maybe, to see what's going on, kind of try to tie where people live with housing costs. So 34% of people live in Charlotte, 16% in Union County, 7% live out of state, mostly South Carolina. And all of these places, especially South Carolina, have a much lower average housing values than we have here in Matthews. And to me, it's always fun to point out that you have more people coming in from out of state to work than actually live in Matthews, which super common. So here's a couple maps of where workers live and where residents work. So on these maps, the legends are kind of hard to see, but basically what you need to know is that the bigger dots have higher concentrations of people. So we'll start with looking at where workers live. 17,632 people work in Matthews. 16,722 of them live outside of town. These workers come from all over, as you can see on the map. 60% have travel distances or commute distances that are 10 miles or more, and 1 in 4, so 28% come from 25 miles or more away. Now looking at the map of where residents work, you have 13,422 Matthews residents who work. 12,482 of them leave town. I'm looking at the map, we can see, we see job centers in Uptown, Valentine, South Park, Airport, University City, and 57% of Matthews residents commute 10 or more miles to work. So really, this is where I really wish we could have an interactive map, because you can kind of picture this daily churn of people coming in and out of Matthews. You have all these workers coming into town for work each day, and then almost all the workers in the town are leaving. So you can picture people coming in, and then residents kind of going on the interstates to work to all these job centers. So you can really think about what the impacts of this, are on roads, traffic, quality of life, efficiency. And so in the planning world, we sometimes talk about location efficiency and having things nearby each other for people to go to. And so that really, the idea of having jobs and leisure and home all close together, has a lot of implications for sustainability, but also for transit viability, to have the density and places to go within town to make things like bus lines and trains or what have you more feasible for the community. Here's a little bit more about these people who work in Matthews. We had a request for some of this data. So we've already talked about how people who work in Matthews make less money than people who live in Matthews. 24% of people who work in Matthews make less than $15,000 a year compared to 16% who live in Matthews. And 40% make over $40,000 a year compared to 58% of people who live in Matthews. And as we talked a lot about our last presentation, a lot of the workers are in industries such as retail or food service or construction. And so a little bit about the demographics of these workers. About 72.5% are white, 27.6% are Black. And it's hard to tell how much this overlaps with the white population, but about 6% are Hispanic or Latino. In terms of age, 28% are age 29 or younger, 50% are between the ages of 30 and 54, and 22% are 55 or older. And that was really interesting that in the report, we looked at job trends over time, so from 2002 until now. It's not actually in the report, but the share of workers in Matthews aged 55 or over increased from, it was 12% in 2002 up to 22% now. That's a pretty big increase. In terms of educational attainment, 28% they did not have data for, so take the rest of these numbers with a grain of salt. It was 19% have bachelor's, 23% some college, 21% have high school or GED, and 9% have a less than high school. So I know that's a lot of stats. I just rolled off, but that's a little bit about the people who work. So next we'll talk about the housing stock. So first we'll look at the kind of the share of renters and homeowners, which are on some levels a reflection of the housing stock that exists in Matthews, especially the prevalence of apartments in Matthews, which is where most renters tend to live. So the share of renters has increased from 17 to 26% in the past 10 years, while the share of owners has slightly decreased from 83% to 74%. And as we would expect, the housing stock is indeed overwhelmingly single-family detached. It's 2% of units. And we can also see there's really few options for independently owned multifamily units. So like townhomes, duplexes, or triplexes, and condos, all of those make up like around 6% of the housing stock.
I think we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
I have one first. Several slides ago, I probably should have asked you one. You had the median value of the homes, and it was like 283 or something for Matthews. We've all been told that the average single family home is $450,000. So what is that number?
Yeah, so those values are from the American Community Survey, which is a 5-year estimate. And we use those numbers because we were comparing Matthews to, say, counties in South Carolina. So for our actual housing assessment, which we're going to get to in a minute, we use the county tax parcel database, which has assessed values and look at sales data. The American Community Survey, when it comes to things like home values, first it's based on, they have people estimate what their house is worth, and then it's a 5-year kind of estimate. So it usually a lot of times what the American Community Survey says will lag what we're seeing.
Yeah, a lot of people here would love to buy that 200.
Oh, I know.
Mr. Spano?
Yes, I'm sorry. Is this presentation the same as the packet that we have our agenda? The reason I'm saying that is I'm having trouble finding these pages. Separate. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So looking at the housing stock, actually look at kind of housing units by subdivision. And so here we can see that first subdivisions are very homogeneous. So almost all subdivisions are either all single family or all multifamily with few in between. And we can see that on the map. We see large swaths of that dark green are places that are 96 to 100% single family. And we see places that are 0 to 10%, which are basically the apartment and multifamily housing communities in that. So the areas that are not in named subdivisions, which is again how we kind of do these boundaries, have the most mix of housing. And so these areas, sort of around downtown Matthews, kind of in that central part of the town there, are areas which likely grew more incrementally and are not subject to as many HOA rules or have as much kind of controls over their development is really kind of how you see that housing mix playing out. So yeah, as we see, those areas are kind of near downtown Matthews. And then looking at that big light green area, where it appears, oh, there's this great mix of housing between Monroe Road and Independence Boulevard. And what we see there is we see a couple of apartment communities, 0 to 10% single family. And then there's only about 72 housing units in that area total. So it's a nice mix, but also not very residential heavy in general. When we get to the land use map, it has most of that categorized as other. So you might actually know more about what's there than I do. Just a quick overview of the housing stock. Most homes in Matthews are around 30 years old. The mean and median year built is 1991. About 3% of homes were built before 1960, 18% are between 1960 and 1980, 53% are between 1980 and 2000, and 27% are built 2000 or later. And again, we see this kind of area around downtown Main Street has the greatest mix of old and new. And kind of, again, looking at the patterns, there is a map in the final report. We tried to not go too map heavy in this presentation. But houses, yeah, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s are really kind of in these large subdivision, large lot subdivisions. And we can also see the impact of I-485 kind of inducing more development on the edges of town. And then also looking at that map, you'll be able to see that neighborhoods kind of built into 2000s and 2010 are noticeably more compact and dense than all the housing that was built previously. Just another few data points. The average home size in the 90s was 2,405 square feet. So again, we have a lot of these older, larger homes. The average household size or average size of homes heated square area overall is 2,328 square. So really, we have this housing stock with these, large lot growth homes. And so, we think about the age of the housing stock, the age of the residents. You might be looking at some challenges for older homeowners in the future to maintain these homes and have the ability to stay in Matthews as they age. Next, we'll look at housing affordability. So this is just another overview of kind of how we define affordability and what the income thresholds were. So we use the income thresholds set by the Housing and Urban Development. These are the thresholds they use when deciding who qualifies for affordable housing. We use the 2021 data because that's what was available when we were doing this report. And these thresholds are based on the area median income. So it's trying to account for people, who live in the area and might want to live in Matthews, but don't necessarily. And so for a 4-person family, the income's, 30% is $25,250. The median income is $84,200, and then moderate income is $101,040. And so a lot of times, developments refer to low income housing as these 30 to 60% limits. So those are some programs, and then a lot of times developers looking to develop workforce housing are targeting that 80 to 120% range. And again, those terms have nothing to do with whether or not people work, but more just kind of the income targets. And then taking that one step further, so when HUD has a family signed up for affordable housing, the expectation is the family will spend 30% of their income towards the housing costs. And then same way, the U.S. Census Bureau defines cost burdened households are those that are spending more than a third of their income on housing. So we took that same rule and applied it to housing stock to determine affordability. And so here we used the assessed 2019 computer assisted mass appraisal data that Mecklenburg County runs. So a lot of these are based on the last assessment, which was in 2019. All that to say, these numbers are probably a little outdated, so we tried not to emphasize them too much. But even using these housing values that we think are on average about 20% lower than the sales prices, only 1 in 3 homes are considered affordable for families making the area median income. Only 16% of homes are available to low income, those 80% AMI households. And then the very low income families that, 30 to 60% are basically priced out of the housing market in terms of being able to purchase a house. And again, these are appraised values. Try not to emphasize them too much, as we know the market has changed. So yeah, that consideration, we look at sales data of the past 18 months, so between January 2021 and June 2022. And as I'm sure you've all heard, it was a very difficult market. There were 839 market sales in Matthews with an average sale price of $419,397 and a median of over $384,000. So yeah, as you see, those are significantly higher than what the American Community Survey was reporting for around the same time period. Of those 839, a whopping 3 were sold as affordable to those those lower, very low income ranges. And only 14% of the homes were affordable to those making 120% of the AMI. And so again, using that kind of income times 3 or 1/3 of household income rule, $128,000 would be the necessary income to afford the median priced home. So an average about $62 an hour in wages. The median household income for current residents of Matthews was around $87,000. So a lot of current residents would struggle to purchase in Matthews today. So here's a map of affordability by sales price. As the map designer, I tried to really emphasize just how few homes were available to those making even up to 120% of the area median income. So you can see, yeah, the blue dots are those up to 120% AMI, and then the yellow ones are those that were basically homes sold for over $300,000, which would require a higher income. So yeah, 0% of homes, a whopping 3, sold for 80% of the AMI, 3% sold at prices that would be affordable for those making the area median income, so that 84,000 number. About 10% were sold for those making 120% of the AMI. So, yeah, think about what those thresholds mean versus what was sold. There's quite a gap. That leaves a lot of families looking for housing on the rental market. And here in Matthews and elsewhere, rental options can also leave families constrained. It's got 4,000 apartments and apartment townhomes in Matthews. And we were not able to get data on single family rentals because it's not a good data source for that. So we're mostly looking at multifamily housing and especially kind of these large corporately owned apartment communities. So there were 13 of these types of apartment communities. The median rent in February 2022 for these communities, again, over a year ago was almost a year ago was $1,646 for a 2-bedroom, which means houses would need an income, or households would need an income of almost $60,000 to afford the median 2-bedroom apartment.
Commissioner Garner.
I just want to interject here. I was looking at, not because I need one, we had apartment prices earlier today. And most of the apartments in Matthews, 1-bedroom studios are 60,600. A 2-bedroom plain bath apartment was around 2,100. Just for context of how much has changed in the past year.
Yeah, we learned today about what the trajectory of rental housing prices are. And it's really hard to know right now whether or not they're flattening out. So as we'll probably talk about in the discussion or in the questions, that's kind of a strange time to do a housing study just because there's so many gaps between where the data was at and where we are on the ground. But yeah, on the left hand of the slide, we have a map of the multifamily communities. One of the questions we were kind of interested in was how well transit serves these communities, especially since logically, dense multifamily are the best candidates to have transit nearby. And what we kind of really see is that the communities on the east side of Independence Boulevard, there's quite a bit of multifamily housing there. It's not well served by transit. They're in close proximity to the Independence Express route. But in terms of getting around town, there's quite a big gap there. And then we also see housing on the outside of I-485. There's a couple townhome communities that are very, very new, but also a little off the beaten path when it comes to transit. So kind of going back to this affordability discussion, and these numbers are might even be higher now. This gap between income and housing costs leads to a lot of cost burden households. So again, we kind of talked about, people spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So 40% of renters overall are cost burden. As we can see, cost burden rates are highest for those very low income. So for people making less than $35,000, 99% are cost burden. For that 35%, or that middle group, 35,000 to 74,989 is 43%. And then it drops drastically kind of once you hit that $75,000 or more threshold. So just kind of to summarize some of the affordability pieces, again, people making median income in Matthews with a hard time buying a home here today. An individual would need to make 100% of the area median income to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, which rules out workers in Matthews' most common industries and a lot of the people who are working here and making under $40,000 a year. We also saw a lot of overlap between housing needs and aging, and kind of the low income community also being older. And so we'll talk about home preservation perhaps being an important tool. But overall, groups making less than 120% of the area median income, which is, as you'll read in the report, it's a lot of seniors in that workforce would have a hard time purchasing a home. Renting is more feasible, but there's still not enough homes even available for rent to match this growth. So it's something to consider. So next, we'll talk a little bit about land use and development. In terms of multifamily and rental housing, you guys have done a great job in the past 5 years or so of increasing your options. So here's a graph of permitted housing units by type and by year. So since 2010, the town has permitted more multifamily units than single family. Single family new units has remained relatively constant over time. And at this point, it's approval of apartments and townhomes that are driving a lot of the growth in Matthews. Next, we'll talk a little bit about land use. So this is an existing land use survey of what's going on in Matthews. You can see that 50% of the land area is used for single family housing in Matthews. All these neighborhoods average fewer than 5 units per acre. So again, not super dense. 16% of the land area in Matthews is vacant. So that's areas that might be available for future development. And only 1% of the area is considered mixed use. As we talk about, the impacts of housing and jobs and transit, having these more mixed use type communities allows a lot of different options in terms of housing price points or transit options that are important for a growing community. I'll turn it over to Rachel Jackson-Gordon to talk about some of the policy.
For the record, I'll respond to Rachel Jackson-Gordon, any of the above. Good evening. It's wonderful to see you all in person. So I'm going to focus on the qualitative findings from our study, and we're also going to talk about the recommendations that we've come up with as a team. And so I want to give a huge shout out to my colleague, Dr. Bill McCoy, who helped me with some of these qualitative pieces of the study, and he knows everyone in this region, I think. So really appreciated having his support through this. I'm going to try to get this clicker correct. All right, so as a researcher, I really toned down the research methodology slide here. In summary, we talked to a lot of people. We talked to people in groups. We talked to people one-on-one, including people like developers, leaders, lawyers, residents, some people who live outside of Matthews but visit Matthews. A really big perspective in terms of who we talked to, how we got the information. And so this sort of helped us answer some of the broader open-ended questions about how people are perceiving affordable housing in Matthews and what we might be able to do to address it, couching that in the perspective of the people in the area. And so this is designed to sort of supplement the other data that we have going on, that Katie and data. Katie has worked so hard. So I was talking to all the people, Katie was crunching all the numbers, and so that's how we've landed where we are. And so some of the questions I asked were, how would you define affordable housing? What are some of the biggest challenges to affordable housing? What groups might need additional support for affordable housing? And what are some opportunities that you see for improvement? And so some people were able to answer the questions and some people were not, at least all of them, given different levels of expertise in different areas. So in summary, I organized this by our research questions. So the first is focused on perceptions of housing in Matthews. And so the big takeaway here is that housing in Matthews is expensive, but it's not the most expensive yet, at least. And so some of the biggest strengths that came up, and you guys can wipe your shoulder, that's not the right saying, dust your shoulder off. People highlighted that the town leaders were showing increased interest in affordable housing. And so they recognized that politics might still get in the way, but they really sensed that leaders in Matthews were starting to invest more time and effort into addressing affordable housing in Matthews. And then, as we all know, Matthews has wonderful green space, walkability, and charm. And so that came up when I asked people about the strengths that they saw in Matthews related to housing. And so some of the challenges really focused on lacking affordable homes and perceived changes to more exclusivity, at least in the last 5 years, is what that time period was attributed to as. And so some people were referring to Matthews as a bedroom community, and I think some of that might resonate with some of you all. And I think a quote that really wrapped up this year is that if Matthews wants to stay the way it has been, they need to have more affordable homes. I think that summarizes the desire to work, play, and live in Matthews really well. So the next piece is who needs affordable housing. And so this is as perceived of the people that we talked to. The key takeaways here were that it's always difficult for people with very low incomes to afford housing in any community at this point in time. That's not to say that those people should be dismissed, but our recommendations really are focused on what might be attainable for the most amount of people and less focused on people with the very low incomes. People really highlighted the workforce. And again, we wanted to highlight that when people talk about the workforce here, they're often referring to people like teachers, police officers, nurses, and doctors, when in reality, we know that the workforce in Matthews often make up people in the lower income brackets and people like food preparation, people like health aides. And so that's something to consider as well. As most of you would assume, the aging community came up quite a bit. And then we shifted to talking about young professionals and people who might be just trying to get started, might be looking at buying their first home. And then people from marginalized communities who are historically less able to own homes across the nation, as well as in Matthews. In addition to those who are just in mid-range income brackets. So as you saw with Katie's data, even people who live here might have a hard time finding an affordable home today if they were to try to move here. So some of our key takeaways related to challenges to affordable housing came down to stereotypes and resistance. And so interestingly, while most people talked about this in some way, I sensed that there was also some change where people were getting more willing to talk about affordable housing, potentially because of market trends that we've seen in the past few years. In addition, some of the additional challenges included current planning processes and policies. I heard some of, let me check my notes here. So the town that is so involved, which was really appreciated by some people, but that level of involvement can sometimes lead to additional requests that might take a potentially affordable project and make it a little less affordable in the end. And then I do want to highlight that some of those informants also noted that they appreciated being able to reach people and get answers as well. And then as we've all seen, market trends, limited land, increased costs for resources are also contributing to these broader issues in Matthews as well as nationally. So I'm going to talk a little bit as well about what other towns are doing because I think that was a point of interest. And so Charlotte and Davidson have some long-standing efforts. And something that might be a little bit newer to highlight is Mecklenburg County has some new engagement with towns, and they've begun to appropriate funds to support affordable housing. And so Manager LaShonda McCorkle-Hart might be a source of information, and that might be a group and organization that Matthews could seek some alliance with in the future. And then Cornelius has completed some initial planning. So they have had a initial plan developed by a consultant, and now they're shifting to a period where they're going to have it heard by the public and get some feedback in that regard. Huntersville is also in some of the beginning stages of planning, but the talks are there. And then we also want to mention that Habitat for Humanity has really been a key player in the area regarding who's developing affordable homes, who's starting to move towards preserving homes that need repair. And so we wanted to give that organizational shout out in addition to all the other organizations that touch on this issue. And then the last point here is that Davidson and Cornelius have pledged some ARPA funds to support historically Black neighborhoods. And so that might be something to consider as well as Matthews moves forward with the housing plan. So I went through that quickly because I know some of the questions might pertain to Katie and her data guru-ness. I'm going to move to the recommendations. And so these were created from a literature review, key informant input. So the people that I talked to, that Bill talked to, the data that Katie collected. We did a literature review, and we also had an internal team review this, including our director of regional policy. So we feel like these recommendations are about as up to date as they can get. And with that being said, this is really still new. The recommendations at a national scale are really nascent, especially in terms of what local municipalities are able to do to address affordable housing. And so here is a very quick summary. And so I'm going to give a little bit more detail on consequent slides here, but the first piece is regarding revising the land use plan and supporting housing development. The next piece speaks to density, which I know is always a fun conversation. The importance of considering location when zoning and permitting, preserving current unsubsidized affordable housing, as well as developing support to facilitate affordable housing in those projects moving forward. So this first piece, revising the land use plan and associated regulations, one of the most recent scholars wrote a book about this and really said that land use plan is one of the biggest tools that local municipalities have at their disposal to address affordable housing. And so we recommend increasing mixed use communities that have multiple types of housing. So you might see some single family, you might see some gentle density as well. We also recommend supporting housing development here by streamlining the development process and making it transparent and approving subsidized projects. And one thing that was a little bit interesting that we saw as an example being done, I forget which other community in a different state, but there was some community that had almost created a book of possible pre-approved plans for housing, and that helped to make the approval process go through faster. So creative solutions might be something to look into as well. We also recommend increasing density through updating zoning. And so our goal here was to make our recommendations as feasible as possible to the town of Matthews and the desires of current residents, and keeping in mind all of those different considerations. And so we want to really focus here on gentle density. And so some of that we've already started to see increased permitting for, right? So duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, not necessarily 200 apartment buildings. We also would recommend thinking about eliminating or reducing parking minimums and revising setback requirements to really enhance the value of that land for housing, as opposed to things that might not be as conducive to increasing the affordability of housing. We also wanted to note that we don't currently recommend mandatory inclusionary zoning. So we know that this is a topic that's discussed a lot, and as it stands, the examples and the evidence really show mixed results of inclusionary zoning. And so as a result, we think that for Matthews, this is not the way to go at the time. That maybe things in the future will improve, or this is a really great strategy, but right now we do not. The next piece revolves around considering location when zoning and permitting. And so the first piece here is to disperse multifamily development. And so this includes for areas already designated as single family home areas, as well as commercial areas. We also recommend focusing on desirable areas. And so some of this is that equity lens that we want to bring into play. We want people who might not have the opportunity to be in high resource areas to have that opportunity, But there's also some research that shows it would be financially more feasible for developers as well. We also recommend prioritizing infill development. So as opposed to taking up farmland or treed areas, we recommend focusing on land and property that already has some sort of structure there so that it facilitates the development of new housing as opposed to potentially making it more challenging and decreasing environmental sustainability. And then we know that the transportation question was one of our research questions going into this, but as we saw with Katie, the transportation isn't super well built out yet in Matthews. And so if the light rail ultimately extends to Matthews, we would recommend working with the transportation and engineering teams. But right now, we didn't feel like that was a particularly huge recommendation to focus on. So we know that impoverished neighborhoods are more likely to gentrify than affluent neighborhoods when a station is built. So that's something to keep in mind as you move forward with, I think, is it the Silver Line that has ongoing talks about progress? So something to keep in mind. We also recommend preserving current unsubsidized affordable housing stock. So this includes some basic things like monitoring existing buildings for code compliance, supporting home repair programs, and focusing on neighborhoods with the greatest need. And so we want to clarify that preservation should address rental and owned units. And we don't think that Matthews might have a direct role with home repair, but can support organizations that do. So this last major recommendation is to develop support to facilitate affordable housing. We know this is a big issue. We know that even in the last 6 months, since we've collected some of this data, we see ongoing changes and trends. And so it's hard work. It takes a lot of capacity to keep these things going. And so we recommend building out partnerships, working with the Matthews Housing Alliance. And that piece is twofold because we want to address things like NIMBYism and the resistance that community members might feel. And we feel that some provision of information might help combat NIMBYism. We recommend partnering with other area towns and organizations. And so part of that recommendation is also to encourage broader regional thriving, because if different towns are conducive to affordable housing, it's going to help the region as a whole. We also recommend developing town capacity dedicated to affordable housing. And so this might look like a task force. It might look like actually hiring some people to come in and do that sort of work. And then the last piece here is touching on that equity issue and really making things as desirable to all community residents as possible. So seeking community engagement during the planning process. So if you're thinking about developing an affordable living community for people who are aging, potentially including an advisory board that has aging individuals on it. So the next steps, we recommend appointing a housing task force. We then recommend prioritizing the report here into a more actionable plan, and then ultimately developing a solid implementation and oversight plan. And so Davidson and Cornelius have used this approach so far. And then on a positive note, I wanted to highlight that the fall election results show that there is increased and widespread voter support for affordable housing initiatives across North Carolina. And I would expect that some of that extends to Matthews as well. So those are the main points of our presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to share this work, and we welcome your questions. And I think Katie is going to join me as well.
I can't remember exactly the slide. I think it's 19. The one said 16% of the houses are yeah. Yeah. Okay. 16. Well, that's one of them. But 16% of the homes are affordable. What's that number? No, I mean, what does 16% relate to? 625 times. In other words, what is the actual number? And then what I wanted to do, let me tell you where I'm going with this, is I want to find out how many homes are affordable versus how many people in our town are working at a particular AMI. So in other words, do we have the number of homes already that are affordable for that population is where I'm going.
Yeah, I think we shied away from using exact numbers like that because this, 30% guideline is still only a guideline. So ideally, we'd like people to be spending 30%, but in reality, people often spend more. So to say, it's X amount of homes is really difficult, especially we're kind of reluctant to do that with this data because again, these values are 4 years old almost at this point. So
Correct. I'm sorry. Clarifying my question. In other words, let's just say we have 100 homes that are just going to, for example, and we have 80 people that are in 80% AMI. I think that we have enough affordable housing for those people. So what I'm trying to get at is the slide that I saw matched the percentage of affordable housing to the percentage of people in the 80% AMI. But the numbers weren't there. Percentages mean nothing in those two respects because we don't have a match of quantity. You see what I'm saying? No, you don't.
no, I
I could tell by the look on their face.
well, it's just percentages again, normalizing the data makes it comparable when you're talking about the quantities. I think that's adding a certain degree of certainty to the data that we just don't have. So we weren't able to include those.
I'll
numbers.
pose my question.
Okay.
Will we be getting this presentation by the exact slide?
Sure, yeah, and the actual report has a lot more detail in it. So we talked about percentages there, but there we do list out the number of housing units in each category. I think we tried to avoid that here, so I wasn't spewing thousands of numbers at you. But the report does have a lot more detail. So we didn't make that comparison directly, but those numbers, the 16,000 workers and X amount of units are listed.
But I do want to compliment the presentation. Excellent. Very well done.
Mr. Winter.
Yeah, I saw back a little farther down, kind of stereotype. What was the stereotype for affordable home that you used?
Yeah, and so I didn't include this quote directly, but someone had said affordable housing might mean someone I don't want to live next to. And so that's the concern. That wasn't the general consensus, but we thought that was a perspective that is held among a lot of people that needs to be addressed because there is that general consensus that if someone is in those lower income brackets, it might not be someone you want to have as a neighbor. And we know that the research shows that that's not necessarily the case, right? So.
Because I can tell you, I live, my church is in Crestdale Community, which is probably the lower income of the town of Matthews. However, I can tell you that the members and people that live there, a lot of those homes, part of those homes were built by Habitat. And I know that if it had not been for Habitat to be able to build those homes, so because, and I see this stereotype so much that they feel because they don't make a certain income, that they are not equal to that. But that's not true because everyone, and I've always said this, everyone wants the same thing. They want a home, they want a picket fence. Used to be 2 kids, now it's about 3 or 4, and a dog. But no matter where you are, I know that the community of Crestdale is great heritage and they have a lot of pride in their homes and they love them there. And it is a good, my church is in there. Done a great job there. I saw something showing along that Matthews is in need of affordable homes. And I can tell you that I think your data is showing back to maybe 2020. But for all the developers that we have seen come in, the average home is running somewhere $120,000 to $30,000. And that's not affordable to police officers, the nurses, nor the teachers that work here in Matthews. I can venture to say that the majority of our police department lives outside of Matthews. So I see there's a great need there for that as well too. Now, Cadiz, Hunterville for being proactive, and Davidson going ahead, and I'm hopeful and very hopeful that Matthews will now, because we have not shown any interest towards affordable homes coming and making sure. I think we're on the right track now. I think we're going in the right direction. I appreciate the report that you.
Yes, I can confirm. I spoke with people from the fire and police departments, and most of those individuals do not live in Matthews.
Commissioner Urban.
Thank you for the presentation. We haven't said anything we haven't talked about in plus or minus 12 to 20 years. The educational process of, I like your word, gentle density. I would, from an architectural standpoint, apply to the missing middle, meaning there's a whole attainable housing category that's missing from that standpoint. And so I would kind of couch your gentle density as that missing middle from that standpoint. Your emphasis, though, seemed to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, the workforce aging in place, that housing stock, it's not trying to go after LIHTC tax credit type deals. It's sort of like leave that to Charlotte. They've got deep pockets that can address that, but your emphasis seems to be more on that sort of bandwidth of 60 to 80%, maybe 80% is the median, so to speak. Do and that was good from that standpoint. So I like the idea of the smaller steps, et cetera. In your big report, and when it's quite larger than 7-9 pages,
You're welcome.
you mentioned something which gave me pause because we've been having this discussion. I know Habitat for Humanity has said we need someone to pivot to household repairs, and the number you cited was 57 homes at $26,000 a home would be approximately $5 million that we sort of allocated. In my mind, that is a good, pardon the expression, squeeze, juice for the squeeze. I mean, it really does. When we were talking about this conversation about Habitat previously, it was like one house, one family, $400,000 all in, you know, it just isn't spreading love well enough. So I like the fact that we came back and looked at the care aspect of it. You talked about that as well. So that's a dynamic that we could really easily support from that aspect of it. And now my final question is, what are the considerations you have on this? It stemmed from a conversation we had in Raleigh last week with our state senators and legislators about land trust. Are you familiar with that? I mean, the fact that so we would look for either private individuals that want to donate land, or the town purchases land, puts it into a trust, that takes that infrastructure off the developer's back. Now the developer builds the vertical, and then there's that relationship you have that brings the cost, the delta down. Is in knowing that in this conversation, is that something you can add to your recommendations? Is that something that you've seen works, or is that something that's just not a viable situation?
I think that there's growing evidence related to community land trusts, and the reason that it's not in our recommendations is because as researchers, we like there to be some pretty solid evidence before we make the recommendation. And so there are mixed results. I just read an article that, there was a lot of the community in Texas, I believe, that had implemented a community land trust, and they're very excited about it. And they had promised all of these units, and then X amount of time in, they had only produced a very small amount of what they had anticipated, and the budget ended up being up for that program. With that being said, I think there probably are successful models out there, and that's something that we could look into further in the future as well.
I'd like to know where those models are, because legislators sort of piqued our interest from that aspect of it, and personally asked me if that's something you want to pursue. Yes, I mean, I think you think of an altruistic developer or a property owner that wants to carve off some land, put that into a trust, would be very beneficial. Once you take the infrastructure out of that play, developers in the affordable housing market, the numbers pencil out better and kind of gets them around. So I'd like to know more about that. And that's good. I'd like to get that up with Raleigh too. They're not going to do anything unless we proactively
lead them in that direction, right?
I will say that I believe, I'm not sure, is it the West Side community? Yeah. There is some of that work happening in Charlotte, so that might be something to keep an eye on as a potential model for if it's successful in the specific community. Yes, so some of that is currently being worked on in the Charlotte area.
Are any further questions or comments? All right, well, thank you very much for your report. And, we'll continue to digest it and probably we'll have some additional questions. Send you the email. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Hello.
Hello, out there. So we'll take a recess, 7 o'clock for early meeting. evening and welcome to our regular Board of Commissioners meeting, February 27th, 2023. We have an earlier 5:30 meeting where we discuss affordable housing, very important. We'll move on to our regular meeting. I'd like to start with the introduction. I have nothing to write. Our Assistant Town Manager will be important. Commissioner Renee Garner, Commissioner Larry Whitley, our Town Manager Betsy Vaughn, Town Attorney Charlie Buckley, Commissioner Mark Tafano, Commissioner Gina Hoover, Commissioner John Urban, our Common Clerk Roy Candino, and our Public Communications person. I always mess with them. Very important to them. Anyway, welcome. I'm going to start with invocation. Commissioner Hoover.
Good evening. Tonight, in honor of Black History Month, I would like to recognize some Americans for their contribution and accomplishments to our country. I did a lot of research on this, and I was so much fun. So it was hard to really pick who I want to put on the list. So I'm just going to give you 15 and a little what their accomplishments are. The first one, Bessie Coleman. She's the first licensed pilot in the world. George Washington Carver, inventor and scientist. Claudette Colvin. She is actually 9 months before Rosa Parks. She refused to give up a seat on the bus. And her and Rosa Parks were friends, and Rosa Parks kind of followed her steps. Albert Frank Cox, first received PhD in mathematics. Dorothy Height, leader in YWCA and president of NCNW. And she is among the few women who were present during the 1993 march on Washington, where Martin Luther King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Jane Boland, she is the first female judge. Rebecca Crumpler, first woman to earn a medical degree in the U.S. John T. Ward, who's an entrepreneur, moving and storage company that is the oldest African-American owned business in the U.S. Sarah Breedlove, also known as Madam C.J. Walker, she's the first female self-made millionaire. Alexander T. Twilight, first state legislator, 1836. Joseph Rainey, first to serve in the U.S. House. Shirley Chisholm, first elected to chamber. Frederick Douglass, first African-American to be on the presidential ballot. Booker T. Washington, great speaker, educator, author, and presidential advisor. And the last, the best, Coretta Scott King. And I would like to quote one of my favorite quotes. When God calls you to a great task, He provides you with the strength to accomplish what He has called you to do. Faith and prayer, family and friends were always available when I needed. I learned that when you are willing to make sacrifices for a great cause, you will never be alone.
Thank you, Commissioner Hoover. That was a great reflection and very interesting and important. I'd like to mention that our Mayor Pro Tem Ken McCool is out of town tonight on personal business as far as I'm here. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Agenda item number. Motion to adopt the- Second. Motion. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Go to the next agenda item, recognition of retiring police P9 Tico. I'd like to ask Officer Brandon McWhirter come forward and say a few words with Tico.
So I'll do my best.
Can I get my phone?
Let's get you a microphone.
So I'll do my best to hold it together, but this is Tico, for those of you who may not have met him. He's 8.5, Belgian Malinois. He's from Holland. He's a dual purpose canine certified in tracking, narcotics, apprehension, article search, building search. And he has just been a huge asset to our community. Whether you've seen us at demos, at little schools, letting kids pet on them and just be friendly and really break some bridges down to build community trust, or whether you've seen him out on the side of the highway trying to get narcotics off the street, he's done it all. And I can say that he's been a blessing in my life. And I can tell you just briefly, I try to put some of the numbers together. He's been with our agency about 6 years now, on the road. And he's had over 1,000 hours in training. He's had over 15 pounds of illegal narcotics seized from the streets of Matthews and other surrounding agencies. He's recovered 15 handguns from the street. And I want to say, it might have been all I can put together, but I'm just humbled and thankful for the opportunity to not only spend time with him on the road, but to be able to retire him and take him home. I have 3 kids at home. Would be heartbroken if he wasn't, part of our family. And he's just a huge addition. So can't thank you enough for this opportunity. I will say I love the support of our board, our town manager, and our chief to be able to grow our unit. I promised the town manager I'd slip a plug in here about our new canines. We do have 3 new canines on the street. You'll see them soon. We're currently, myself and Officer Osich are training them. They are non-biting, but German short-haired pointers. And they're going to do the same thing Tico did, except for the bite work. Again, you'll see us back in the schools, back in the community, meeting kids and just serving the community the best we can. So other than that, that's all I got to say. I just really thank you for all being here, and I thank you all for the opportunity to serve. Thank you.
I'd like to read the certificate of appreciation. Pretty brief. It says hereby awarded to Tico by the Mayor, Board of Commissioners of the Town of Matthews, recognition of Tico's loyal and dedicated service to the Matthews community, Matthews Police Department, handler Brandon McWhorter. I signed this, so have the board. So thank you very much. Great dog there. Go get him a steak or something. Next, I'd like to read a proclamation recognizing the Year of the Trail. And I'm going to read this first, and then I'm going to invite Corey King, our Parks and Rec Director, to come up and speak about it a bit. Let me read this proclamation. Whereas the natural beauty of Matthews is critical to the quality of life and health and economic well-being as residents, whereas existing and future trail projects are an integral part of recreation and transportation possibilities in Matthews and promote an enjoyment of scenic beauty by our residents and our visitors, and whereas parks, greenways, trails, and natural areas across Matthews are welcoming and all and provide a common ground for Matthews residents of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds to access the rich and diverse natural cultural and historic resources of Matthews. Whereas Matthews' natural assets and resources are integral to disaster recovery, resiliency to climate change, future generations. And whereas trails offer quality of life benefits to all of its expressions of local community character and pride, its outdoor workshops for science education, its tools for economic revitalization, as free resources for healthy recreation, an accessible alternative transportation, and as sites for social and cultural events. And whereas trails provide an opportunity to display art and celebrate the history and unique cultural resources of Matthews. And whereas the North Carolina Department of Transportation published the Great Trails State Plan that identifies a network of shared use paths and trails that connect every county in North Carolina with a focus on connections between population centers and North Carolina state parks. And whereas the North Carolina General Assembly designated 2023 as the year of the trail in North Carolina to promote and celebrate the state's extensive network of trails that showcase our state's beauty, vibrancy, and culture. And whereas North Carolina is known as the Great Trail State, now therefore I, John F. Bigden, Mayor of the Town of Matthews, do hereby proclaim 2023 as the year of the trail in Matthews, North Carolina. Command its observance to all. Witness whereof I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the great town of Matthews fixed this 27th day of February 2023. Congratulations, board.
I think I did something, but they said 2023 is the year of the trail for the state of North Carolina, but we also felt it was important Matthews to also designate 2000 as the trail in Matthews. So that also became a campaign, the Year of the Trail campaign, spearheaded by the Great Trails State Coalition, which is a composition of industry, trail industry partners, nonprofit organizations, and other local government members. Two goals of this campaign, one being to brand North Carolina as the Great Trail State, but also to secure some sustained state level funding around North Carolina trails. So here in Matthews, on our first day outdoors event on January 1, that was our local kickoff to 2023 would be the year of the trail, in which Susan played a large role in making that happen, also with Melissa Johnson. So, but there are more trail activities planned throughout the year. These events will highlight benefits of trails, few being free access to users, improved health and well-being, off-road trails providing safe separation from vehicle traffic, protection of valuable natural resources, and of course that positive economic impact of trails. We will definitely share this proclamation made by Matthews to the rest of the Great Trail State Coalition, just showing our support for this campaign.
Thank you, Corey. Many of you know I live along the 4 Mile Creek Greenway, and my office actually overlooks the Greenway. And so sometimes it's hard to work because I'm watching so many people, start out as people watch to this continual stream of people walking, running, skateboarding, and cycling on that trail and walking their dogs, etc. So it's a great asset to the community. So let me, thank you. Corey, look at me. So I believe the official responsibility for maintaining those trails, county, at least 4 Mile Creek, but we still see town employees out there. Whenever someone calls in with any kind of issues, our town employees are always right on the spot to take care of everything. We really appreciate that. The trails are remarkably well maintained, clean, beautiful. Thank you. Move on to the next agenda item, public comment. Anyone who is registered in advance to speak will speak first, and then we'll see if there's anyone in our virtual audience who wishes to speak. So I have a few people signed up. The first is my pastor, Chuck Wilson.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thanks to all of you, our town council, for allowing me just a few moments to speak. Again, my name is Chuck Wilson. I'm one of the pastors of the Matthews United Methodist Church here in our community. First of all, a very special thank you for all the support that you have given to our Matthews Clergy Collective over the last few years. Now, these days, we have the Martin Luther King holidays. We've had gatherings for the war in Ukraine, for remembering the George Floyd incident, and so much more. And so on behalf of our clergy gathering, I say a very special thank you. Secondly, I'm here also to speak about the use of what I'm understanding is a large amount of money to be used for possibility of affordable housing. What some I've heard to say referred to it as accessible housing. Our friends at Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church have put together an incredible transformative life landscape altering project to dramatically impact for good one of the oldest historically Black communities in North Carolina, Crestdale. Certainly, we want to support this effort. But more can be done with that money. I know of two other groups, Habitat for Humanity and Rainbow Express, that have had conversations around dollars, and I'm here to plead for us to do our very best to release the purse strings. Both of these groups are hard at work with amazing outcomes among those without disabilities and those that are homeless. And I'm so proud to call many of these persons in these two groups friends of mine. Why, even we've had them in our home. Matthews United Methodist is also helping to furnish the homes of those within the Habitat homes with our home-to-home ministry. I tell the church financial leaders all the time at the church that I serve that the church is not a bank. We're not to sit on money, but we're to be a conduit for meaningful transformation. So, for the town of Matthews, to do our best to release the purse strings, put that money to work to provide accessible housing in Matthews. At the very least, could we consider partnering with groups like Laurel Street Development Group and get their guidance on what could be done with accessible housing here in Matthews? I think our friends at Mount Moriah have been thrilled with their partnership with Laurel Street. I'm a religious leader in the Judeo-Christian tradition, so it might be, you wouldn't be certainly a surprise to you if I didn't read a Bible verse. From the Hebrew Bible, the book of Isaiah, it says, "Woe to you who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is no room for anyone but you, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land." Let's work together so that every person in our community has a roof over their head, knowing that the well-being of each of us is intimately tied to that of all of us. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak for a few minutes tonight on behalf of these important matters. Thanks.
Next speakers we have signed up are James Ross and Ellie Waters. I usually get a tandem.
Is that okay? Well, we did not prepare something in particular to come and say, but we just wanted to introduce ourselves. My name is James Ross. We work with Rainbow Express Ministries, which is one of the organizations that Chuck very kindly referenced there. Our actual purpose of being here was to come earlier and to learn alongside you guys based on the presentation and all the information that was put together. We have had some meetings with a few of you as well, but Rainbow Express Ministries is a nonprofit organization that has been based right here in the heart of Matthews for 25 years now as a summer camp program at Matthews United Methodist Church, and now as a standalone nonprofit organization. And a big part of the future of our organization, we see a vision to provide residential offerings for a large number of the young adults we serve with disabilities right here in town. So we wanted to say that we're really encouraged by the town's focus on affordable and accessible housing in the future, and just kind of share our well wishes that perhaps we could help be a part of that solution or opportunity moving forward. So that's really all we had to prepare, but thanks for your time.
Thank you. I also want to say one more thing. I just want to say that we know that the town of Matthews wants to be welcoming to all people, and we hope that includes people with disabilities. I'm sure some of y'all have seen our community out in the town walking on the Greenway, and we volunteer at Renfro's and Brakeman's and Bear Food. And yeah, we just hope that the town of Matthews will embrace and welcome and just integrate people with disabilities alongside those without disabilities. So thank you.
No, I had the opportunity to go to the event you had several weeks ago at church there, the auction, etc. James, I believe I sat with your parents. You kept telling me what a great guy you were. Also, I shared with the fellow commissioners that the breadth of everything that you do at Rainbow Express is much more than I envisioned before I looked at that meeting. So it's a very nice organization. Next up is Lonnie Stinson.
To the council members, it's good to be here. My name is Lonnie Stinson. I currently serve as the assistant pastor at Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church under the leadership of our pastor and commissioner Larry W. Whitley. I'm the son of an Air Force career airman. I was raised all around the world from Mount Idaho to Okinawa, Japan. And as a result, my father's assignments placed me in a very diverse environment. It was a diversity of culture and color, diversity of awareness and creativity. And upon my father's retirement from the Air Force and return to North Carolina, I attended the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and later joined the U.S. Army, where I served as a command sergeant major and retired after 30 years of service. And during my career in uniform, I again found myself and brought my family up and served and raised them in an environment of diversity. My career field in the Army was human resource management, and that encompassed recruiting, screening, assessing, training, mentoring, professional development, and promotion of those who would serve long after I had departed. And I transitioned from the military, my uniform, and joined the Department of the Army Civil Service. And I was promoted to GS-14 and served as the Adjutant General and Deputy Director of Human Resources for the Army's largest basic combat training center of excellence, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And during my combined 40 years of leadership in human resource management, I've learned to ensure, foster, appreciate the strength of diversity and the success of diversity, a diversity of culture, a diversity of color, awareness, and creativity. Therefore, I want to commend you on the creation of the Matthews Cultural Diversity Committee. And according to the town website, a few of the responsibilities of the committee are to foster a climate of mutual respect among the many diverse groups and communities in Matthews. Next, to improve communications between these groups and communities and the town government and leaders. And then lastly, to increase Matthews' capacity to become a more culturally competent organization and community. However, this leads me to an area of concern. For according to the town website, Matthews Fire and EMS is a combination department consisting of a chief, a deputy chief, an assistant chief, an administrative assistant, 4 captains, 3 lieutenants, 21 full-time firefighters and EMTs, and approximately 60 part-time and volunteer firefighters and EMTs. However, the current demographics of the fire and EMS department do not reflect the diversity of the town of Matthews. More specifically, the current demographics of the fire and EMS department do not reflect the Matthews population of people of color. This is seen in the fire and EMS department, and most importantly, is also evident in the fire and EMS positions of leadership. Therefore, I would commend you on the creation of the Cultural Diversity Committee, and yet encourage you to consider the principles and objectives of that committee as you recruit, select, train, professionally develop, and promote to ensure this department more accurately reflects diverse cultures, colors, awareness, and creativity of the population it serves. I believe our diversity is our strength. Thank you for these few moments.
Thank you, Mr. Tenson. Ruby Jones.
Good evening. My name is Trudy Jones, and I'm a member of Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church here in Matthews as a deaconess and also as the church finance secretary. I think I better. As Black History Month comes to an end and we're going into March, which is going to be Women's Month, I want to tell you about a notable Black woman. There are many famous Black women who have made an impact in the fight for civil rights, the fight for equal rights. I have long admired the everyday working men and women who for 13 months, 381 days, carpooled, walked, and took taxis during the Montgomery bus boycotts. The woman is Joanne Robinson. Born in 1912 in Culloden, Georgia, Robinson was the 12th child of farmers. Her family relocated to Macon, Georgia. Robinson was valedictorian of her high school graduating class and became the first college graduate of her family when she earned a bachelor's degree from Fort Valley State College in 1934. Robinson became a public school teacher in Macon, earned a bachelor's degree from Atlanta University, and studied English at New York's Columbia University. She also taught at Mary Allen College in Crockett, Texas. In 1949, Robinson moved to Montgomery to teach English at Alabama State College and became active in the Montgomery community, joining the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Reverend Dr. Martin King Jr. would later serve as pastor. Ms. Robinson joined the Women's Political Council, WPC, a group designed to motivate African women to take political action. Experiencing the prejudices underlying racial segregation firsthand in the late 1940s, when she was screamed at for sitting in the empty white people section of a city bus. The driver pulled over to yell at her, and Robinson fled the bus, fearing that he would hit her. Disgusted by the incident, she began to mobilize against the segregated city bus system. Robinson became president of the WPC in 1950 and focused the organization's efforts on desegregating buses. Working with Attorney Fred Gray, she met with the then mayor of Montgomery, William A. Gale. The city's leadership was not interested in integrating buses, so Robinson conceptualized a boycott. After the arrest of Rosa Parks on December 1st, 1955, Robinson had written a flyer urging Montgomery's African Americans to boycott city buses on December 5th of that year. Robinson and others distributed over 50,000 flyers overnight. When the boycott proved successful, the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, led by Dr. King, came to manage the continuation, and Robinson was appointed to the MIA's executive boards. Robinson was arrested and targeted with violence. Police officers threw a rock into her window and poured acid on her car. The harassment became so bad that state police were requested to guard her home. On June 5th, 1956, a lawsuit brought by 5 Montgomery women ranging in age from 15 to 70 plus, who were all arrested at various times before Rosa Parks for not giving up their bus seats to white passengers. Represented by attorney Fred D. Gray and the NAACP, they sued the city in U.S. District Court, seeking to have the busing segregation laws totally invalidated. They won. This was appealed in the U.S. Supreme Court, which upheld the lower court's decision and declared segregated seating unconstitutional. December 20th, 1956. The boycott continued until December 21st, 1956. Robinson published a memoir entitled The Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Woman That Started It in 1987. She died in Los Angeles on August 29th, 1992. These women and countless others prove that you do not have to be rich or well-known to make change. You must be committed to the cause you are fighting for and be ready and willing to make the sacrifices necessary to make changes happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. I think what's always amazing is to consider how recent history all these things occurred. So it wasn't really a long time ago. Thank you for sharing that story. Mr. Baylor, Fred Baylor, should be there.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Matthews Board of Commissioners. I also come before you tonight on behalf of Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church. Of course, my name is, you stated, Fred Baylor. My role at Mount Moriah is the chairman of the Deacon Board. And I stand here tonight
out of concern for the lack of diversity that exists within the Matthews Police Department, specifically in the higher ranking positions. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is my understanding that the rank of sergeant is the highest rank that is currently held by African Americans in our police. Now, we at Mount Moriah, we have the highest respect for our police department, for all they do. We show our appreciation every year when we have what is called Public Cop Day at our church. We show our appreciation and we provide food and fellowship, and we just have a great time. You know, talking to the officers, they seem to have enjoyed themselves, and they say that they have a great time. I'm asking you tonight to consider qualified African Americans when you fill the positions of lieutenants, captains, majors, assistant chief, and chief of police. You know, I'm reminded of a personal situation when I was a member of the Virginia National Guard. I held the rank of Elite 5 Sergeant at the time, and I was nominated to become an officer. This occurred back in 1978. During that time, there existed what was called good old boy system. Now, those non-Black individuals hunted, fished, and partied together. They always looked out for each other when it came to achieving rank. Now, my selection to become an officer was fought by these individuals. As I previously stated, this occurred in 1978, and I would hope that 2023, that the good old boy syndrome is null and void. When my nomination reached the desk of the base commander, he called me into his office for an interview. And he told me that what he was about to do upset a lot of people. He didn't use the word upset, he used the PO word. And he told me that he felt that it was the right thing to do, to nominate, to accept my nomination and recommend that I attend the Academy of Military Science. I'm not here tonight to toot my own horn. Don't get me wrong, but I was the first African American listed person on the base selected to attend and complete the required course at the Academy. You know, maybe history could be made within the Matthews Police Department by selecting a qualified African American to fill one of the higher ranking positions. History has already been made here in Matthews by having the first African American on the Board of Commissioners. I said all that to say this. All I wanted was an opportunity to prove that I could perform the duties and responsibilities required by a military officer. All I'm asking from you tonight is to open up the door of opportunity for African Americans to fill positions higher than the rank. I would think that, you know, I don't have any idea what the selection criteria might be within the department. But I would think that it's based on your performance in the lower range. Now, in some cases, it might be feasible to bring an African American, a qualified African American from the outside to fill some of these positions. In closing, I'm also reminded of a song by a famous African American singer back in the 1970s. He said, "I don't want you to give me nothing. Just open up the door and I'll get it myself." Thank you, Mr. Mayor and board members, for allowing me to cover the board meeting. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here, board, mayor. Just wanted to touch on part of the community here that's affecting me directly. I'm glad to be a part of Matthews, that the town that does treasure and love its trees. That is one of the things that sold me on the house that my wife and I purchased, this home in Candle on. There's a subdivision behind us, and there was a 30-foot buffer zone. It's a designated undisturbed tree natural area preserve. And we were excited about that, to have a little bit of privacy for our backyard. But unfortunately, the homeowners there, some of them have ripped that out, including trees of, this kind of a diameter. And I think, Ms. Hawk, I might have copied you on one of the communications I had with Kurt Whittington. So the reason I'm here is I'm being told that it's okay for them to rip this vegetation, small trees and such out. And I was able to successfully stop one homeowner. He was gracious enough to rethink his idea of, he was taking down trees this big. So I know most of us here probably value the trees. Is that true? Is that you guys into that? Is that part of the Matthews culture? Well, so I felt like, well, that was a victory. So I was quite stunned when I got communications back from Kurt Whittington saying that the vegetation and the smaller trees could be taken out. So now I'm looking at a very expensive privacy fence and the loss of natural habitat. So there's a lot of birds and animals that we used to see in our backyard. So I'm trying to figure out basically what is the path to move forward to get this resolved, because I don't know where to go from here. I've spoken to Rusty Rozelle at Mecklenburg County, and he seems to think it's fine and dandy as well. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But to me, undisturbed tree natural area preserve means you don't touch it. One of the neighbors has actually installed a tool shed in the 30-foot buffer zone. So I'm asking for help, basically what I'm doing here tonight. I don't know if Jay Camp is here anywhere in the house. Rob Wells. So if anyone has suggestions, I would like to hear about what we can do.
Mr. Zay, I'm just reading back through what our code enforcement officer sent you, and a lot of your issues were taken up with Mecklenburg County. And so they would be the final arbiter of some of those. So I'm not sure that there's anything else that we're able to do from the enforcement standpoint. They didn't find that there were notices of violation. So we're happy to follow up with you if there is any other enforcement pointed towards, but based on what I have in front of me, I'm not sure that there's a lot more.
That's okay. Fair enough. Well, that's my main purpose for being here this evening. And again, I do enjoy living here. I'm glad it's the year of the trail, and looking forward to that new path over there by Idlewild Park over the other bikeways. Thank you.
All right, I know we have a pre-registered person who's not here. Roy's going to read a letter with Carrington.
Yes, he says, my wife and I moved to Matthews in January 2020 during the height of COVID. My wife's deceased mother and father had owned this home in Matthews since 1981. My wife had urged me to make this our forever home, and we both enjoyed coming here to visit her folks and our family in the jewel of a small town of Matthews, North Carolina. The Eastern Gateway Plan for Sante Village by the Pappas Group is still too dense to be supported by current infrastructure. This 80% retail community will be a burden to the residents of Matthews as far as police. Just where is the police station going here? Fire and rescue, garbage and brush pickup, water and sewer, utilities, street maintenance. Heck, we can't even get our crumbling street paved properly when those around us do repeatedly. Letters and photos were sent to town manager with a response, it is scheduled sometime in the future. Town manager Hawk understandably does a remarkable job with the funding and support she has given. But if we are encountering difficulty presently, how will we correct these issues in a more congested and dense environment after only a few years? As a transit community and close to I-45, criminals will view this as easy pickings. We have witnessed this firsthand and been victims of just such occurrences. Without true home ownership, leasing companies who fail to support aging communities become the bad part of town but not predominantly by just the residents, but by poor planning decisions to allow an unbalanced community through inadequate zoning in the first place. This Pappas Group community does not meet the Matthews Stormwater Ordinance. Thanks to the Matthews Town Commissioners that realized the dire effects to our community's environment if the Matthews Stormwater Ordinance is not followed. Buffers for the streams creeks require a 100-foot floodplain and not just the adjacent neighborhood boundary of Windsor Estates, nor does it meet the 10, 25, 50, 100-year storm flood requirements. Any citizen can appeal processes for permits not adhered to by the SWAC to the Mecklenburg County Land Use and Environmental Services Agency. The maximum civil penalty for each violation of the PCO is $27,500. Each day of continuing violation shall constitute a separate violation. Many folks that have witnessed only the quiet, serene town of Matthews who believe any progress will be just fine have not encountered the opposite effect and fail to realize the importance that decisions now will have impacting a wonderful community going forward. The future properly planned Matthews is in your hands. God bless Edward Carrington of Citation Corp.
All right. Do we have anybody else in the room? Comments? Maureen, do we have anybody in our virtual audience that's in?
No, we don't.
All right, we'll move on then to item 8, our consent agenda.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent.
Second.
Commissioner Quigley, a second by Urban. Any discussion? Commissioner Quantum?
Becky, on item G, is this a pro bono service that we're just extending the contract because I don't see a dollar amount?
That is a renewal. Susan, can you talk to the continuation of the transportation impact analysis service?
Sure, happy to. Thank you for the question. It is reimbursed by developers. So we hire the reviewer, tell the developer how much that's going to be. They pay us and then we pay. So we're just a pass through. No capital outlay on our part at all.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions? All in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Let's move on to item 9, unfinished business. Consider software upgrades. Police Department Communications Center. Chief William.
Thank you much, Diana. I appreciate allowing me to speak tonight. We're asking for an improvement in our 911 call making system. It's seriously outdated. We probably read the memo that we sent over. I won't go through it all, bore you with it, but basically what we're looking at is a new system that will improve caller location capabilities. It'll differentiate from wireless and landline calls. It has call prioritization capabilities. It does a lot of things that we cannot do right now. It also allows our supervisors to listen on calls with the dispatchers who are in training, which is a great asset for us. It also will integrate with our CAD system. And it's just going to improve overall service. We're also working on a renovation of the space there with improved consoles and more comfortable chairs that we're using as support for money to purchase. What we're asking the commission to consider tonight is the cost of this is a $91,000 initial payment, which we will cover with asset forfeiture funds. But there's an annual recurring cost of roughly $30,000 that we ask to be included in this year's budget and future budgets to cover the annual fees and maintenance of the system.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions?
Yes, I don't know the correct terminology, but is it called the cell? When the 911 call is made, it then gets transferred from Charlotte over to Matthews. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I had numerous questions in the past about why we don't have a 911 center of our own. I know Pineville does, if I recall correctly. And can you give me an explanation of why we don't have our own? It's not cost effective for us right now, so it's a pretty expensive proposition. What is that expense? I don't have it. The reason I'm asking is I personally had to intervene at this college because of the time it took for 911 call to be transferred to Matthews and for it to respond. I had to intervene at what is now a closed Shell station personally. And that prompted all of this discussion about why we don't have calls coming directly to our center here. I don't know what the delay is. I'm sure you have the statistics for that, but I would like to have some kind of study done to find out what the cost would be and what the ramifications would be and benefits of this having a, and maybe using Pineville as an example, because I believe my recollection is correct. Take it upon themselves to do that. So I'm totally for this particular memorandum. It's just that going forward, I'm wondering if money can be spent toward our own center. Thank you.
I think what I would suggest before a study is given our interim chief's tenure with the town, as well as mine, I think it would do us best to perhaps first just look into in general. I think there may be some limitations on the number of PSAPs that could be in county as far as the ability to get funding. You can get some funding from PSAP. It's essentially just kind of get the backstory of how we came to be set up the way we are versus why some of our neighbors are set up the way we are. And some preliminary research as far as is that even an option for us. We can bring that back to the board and then determine if there are any additional steps to take after that. But I think just getting some better background first.
Commissioner Whitley.
Thank you so much. I'm Mark, speaking to that. It is not cost efficient for local towns that have 911. Most of them originated in February County. They just upgraded it. Come talk about the system that we are working with now that directly different 911 services than like when you call, they want to know, the prompt now tell you it's an emergency or something such, but you talk to 4 people before you get to where, but that's the system that goes to February County. It is not feasible for a local town to have its own 911 system. Speaking to the reason I achieved I'm glad to see it because now Captain Walter, I had my own telecommunications center. I knew what it is to have updated software because it was so hard for a long time for my troopers and my telecommunicators to be able to communicate properly and have update stuff so they can give instant directly where the location where the officer is hurt or something. So I'm very much supportive of this, and I know there are a lot of stuff that we have in the police department is outdated. And I know one of the things that former chief was working on is having that second floor to equip with some type of emergency services. And I am still much supportive of that. We need that. We get here and then I think there was some money we might be funded to get that down, but I am 110% of upgrading this communication center. Strangely odd enough, my career started at the ASU Communication Center. I worked my way through college in the Communication Center. I know how antiquated that becomes so quickly, become just outdated and analog. Have to go to digital. I know things just move with it, so I'm very much supportive that we fund this. I know that I'm hearing that total cost is. Tell me what the total cost. I know 30 something thousand, but issue 30, how many years we talked about funding this space?
So we are looking at a first year implementation cost of 91,000. And so that is for the setup and training and all of that. And this is just for the technology to improve the calls, the actual consoles, as well as records management system. Those are other proposals that the police department is working on that you'll see in the coming months. But this is really just for the technology of the actual phone call and how it is coming into our dispatch center and then how they're able to function throughout that call. So 91,000 is startup, and the annual cost is the 30,000. That, if this is approved, that 30,000 will show up in your FY24 budget and then be a recurring cost from that point forward. But the 91,000, we have some federal asset forfeiture funds that we're able to utilize for this expense. So it's not an impact on the general fund. This is a qualifying expense, at least for the implementation. Katie and I will talk to see if those ongoing costs are also asset forfeiture eligible. That'll be something that we discuss during the regular.
That's good. Forage funds are good because of when I was working with drug and addiction, we had great independent funds that circle back to us to pay for equipment that we didn't, not true, but not district at particular time. Benefit greatly from the forage funds. So thank you so very much. Thank you, thank you.
Chief, I've got a question. How much federal asset forfeiture funds do we have in total? Approximately.
We currently have about 330,000 in our account right now, but there's another, so that's we're waiting on finance. That's probably another 50,000-60,000. And then we've also participated in some federal investigations that we're waiting on them to cut the checks based on past percentages. That could be another 500,000.
That's great. Commissioner Gardner.
Chief, what can you spend federal forfeiture dollars on?
It's limited to things that we cannot use it like games, product, recurring costs. We can use it for one-time expenses, but we can use it for purchasing equipment, things that we would not normally put in a budget, on things that we can pay for without having put in a budget. Things like drones that we just purchased, bought some new earpieces for the officers, use massive forfeiture funds, just a variety of things that allows us to improve our technology without having to come for commission and ask for budget increases.
So that explains to me why it wouldn't be a cost that we would say future forfeiture dollars would go to cover the recurring costs that needs to be in the budget year by year. So for that reason, I would like to make a motion that we approve the purchase of the recommended qualitative solution piece of federal asset forfeiture funds and the recurring costs being included in future annual budgeting costs.
Second. Motion from Commissioner Gardner, a second by Commissioner Whitley. Are there any other questions? Commissioner Capano.
Yes, before we leave this subject, are we going to look into what the cost would be to make ourselves a PSAP?
As I stated, my recommendation is that we first determine how we came to be set up the way we are and what the feasibility is. I believe there are limitations. I'm talking from memory here, so correct myself if I'm wrong, but I believe there are limitations on the number of PSAPs that can actually be located within county. And I believe that those are already taken. So I would be reluctant to go down a cost exercise if there is no funding or designation available for us. So I'd like to first see if it's even a possibility before we start going down the funding.
Because I'd like to do whatever we can to increase the safety of our citizens and answer great. Thank you for looking at that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further comments? Now I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, sir. And Mr. Powell, I'm very concerned about the calls away to Charlotte. I can assure you that once it gets to our dispatchers, they get them out very quickly. Actually, I can confirm that I actually stayed in the call center for probably about 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Wonderful young people that you have there, and great job. I would like the calls to come directly to them. Thank you. Also, one last thing I forgot to mention, there's 3 canines we purchased. I'm looking forward to that, and that's what those drug dogs bring in a lot of those bugs.
Do we recall Tico for retirement?
Tico's done his time. It's time for some of the younger dogs to step up. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Move on to new business. Item 10A, consider project management software.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Very happy to be standing before you tonight to present on something a little bit different. But it feels like 'tis the season for software. I feel like you all have been hearing requests from staff for several months about software. And I think it's probably attributed to we're trying efficiencies, work efficiencies, right? And in the engineering division, engineers are good for just kind of making do with what we've got. And that's how we've been doing project management for years in the engineering division. The onboarding of 2 additional project staff members, Dana and Eric, it became very apparent that the kind of piecemeal thing that I've been doing since I started here is not really working well for us. So we've needed project management software for a while. Think of all the DOT projects that Dana manages, all of the construction projects that Eric manages, and all the other various and sundry projects that I manage, and then add in Corey's projects, Life's projects. So one robust system that can be used among all departments was something that I was really interested in pursuing. Eric and I interviewed 4 companies. We did some research and kind of watched some videos and found 4 companies we talked to, or 4 vendors. And we narrowed it down to 2. And after much discussion, we would like to recommend Project Mates. Project Mates has all the features that we would use right away: budgeting, scheduling, payment applications, all the things that we currently need and are kind of like pay applications. Each contractor does their own thing. It'd be nice to standardize everything. Teresa's constantly getting phone calls from us. Everything looks different. So to streamline everything and standardize it, especially faced with the bonds projects that you would like to, that the public has asked you to deliver for them, we'd like to purchase software now, get used to it, work with it with the projects that we currently have so that we're ready to roll whenever you are ready to get the bond project started. It does have a opportunity for a public interface, so we can post reports on our website that are aesthetically pleasing. If I posted a report, it would be super boring and hard to read. But Project Maze really impressed us with the reporting abilities that they have, where they can report out how much has been spent, the timeline, and other interesting facts that you and the public may want to know. So our recommendation is with Project Maze. Unfortunately, I didn't get this done in time to get it in this fiscal year's budget for the Public Works Department. So I am asking for appropriation from the general fund for the initial setup. It would be $26,950, and then a recurring annual maintenance fee of $15,300, which CJ has already put in the proposed Public Works budget for the next and subsequent fiscal years. Happy to answer any questions at this time.
Yes. Is there any free trial period that you can try this? And an engineer as well, I'm aware of some of these project management software programs that take more time to use than the value you get out of the lesson. As well. So
Yeah, that's a great question. Interestingly, none of the vendors gave us a free trial period.
But you're confident based on your research that this will not be the case with this, that add value.
Ideally, yeah. Ideally, it would be out of the box, ready to use.
Software companies realize they can do subscriptions, and so when you buy the software, they should do the best. So, Commissioner Spano.
Yes, Susan, is this a web-based or is it client server? In other words, is it used on their servers and it's web-based?
It's hosted on their server and is web-based.
Great. No, I was motion to approve. Have additional questions? Sure.
So, Susan, first, my office has to use what all the other contractors use. So we have to adapt to Procore and other systems, which is very unfortunate. So how, in your situation, dealing with Live or somebody like that, is there any need to dovetail or something? Because the fact is, I mean, is this going to be compatible with other software that maybe a contractor doing a road or a building is using? How do you resolve that? Is it compatible?
It is. Thank you for that question. I should have mentioned it. So Procore is the most popular contractor software, and the two we narrowed down to do integrate with Procore. But we didn't want to purchase Procore ourselves because it didn't have that scheduling and budgeting on the planning and design side that we really wanted.
Very expensive.
I didn't even look into it. That's
Commissioner Spano, any comment on?
Yes, before I do, thank you very much for mentioning about its public transparency. That's a great feature. So I'd like to make a motion to authorize the town manager to purchase project management software and appropriate $26,000 from the general fund for the total initial cost of the software.
Motion from Commissioner Spano, second by Commissioner Garner. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Thank you.
Now receive the monthly budget report from Precinct 1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the board. So here we are once again, and life is still going well in the town of Matthews. Ad valorem tax collections year to date, year to year are 1.63% higher than last year at the same time. So while the amount is also larger, we are also at a higher collection rate, which is an awesome thing at this time of year because we have collected, the largest chunk of what we are going to collect. It will kind of trickle in from here, but last year at this time we were at 94.75% of the budget, and this year we're at 96.38. Sales tax continued to surprise and amaze us all. We are currently 22.07% higher year over year for sales tax collections than we were a year ago today, which is awesome. And we hope that continues on that trajectory for the as far in the future as possible. Occupancy tax is up 9.3% year over year. So people are still coming to Matthews, staying in Matthews. Rental car tax collections are 8.1% higher year over year. So the tourism is still booming and doing very well. The general fund operating surplus, as you see, is much higher than a year ago at this time. However, approximately 1.5 million of that is ARPA funds. But however, even if you back the ARPA funds out, we're still 7.4% higher than we were at the same time last year. Anyone have any questions?
Any questions, Commissioner Irvin?
Becky, did you bring Teresa up to speed on the conversation you had with legislators about trying to broaden the definition?
We haven't talked about that recently, but we've had the conversations in the past.
Okay, and we're keeping that on our radar with this hunt and on that on. Okay, great, because I think that's really important. Thank you.
Mr. Potter?
Hey, Teresa, the original, I think, projection for fiscal year 23 was 16.9, is that correct?
In sales tax,
In that born.
in Applebaum.
So you're confident we're going to come in at 16 point.
And we are confident that we're going to come in very close to 16.1.
Okay.
Because we usually average in the 99 to 98% of collection. So yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Whitley?
Yes, one of the things, very important also, congratulations, West Salem State again for winning the CIAA championship.
That's right.
My granddaughter is attending out there as well, and I have two. Actually, also, congratulations. West Salem State
That's right.
University.
The Rams are representing well.
Rams are representing well.
That's right.
All right, I have no further questions.
The next two items are mine also.
Well, it is software night.
It is software night.
Book software.
So yes, so you have a memo before you, and as you say, it seems to be the year end with the night of software. So with all of this software that is now, as you know, subscription based versus we just pay one fee and we own the software and we can do what we want to with it. We now must pay all these companies annually. So GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which is the federal organization that makes the rules for what I do, for a lot of what I do all day, every day, said, well, now that everybody has these subscriptions and we have these multi-year contracts for transparency and for better evaluation by rating agencies, that we must now, beginning with this current fiscal year, report on our annual comprehensive financial report, all software-based information technology agreements, which is all of these subscriptions that we have, which are growing because again, everything we have, even Microsoft, we're getting to the point where you have to have an annual subscription. You're not going to do things. So Debt Book is a company that we are already partnered with for the lease implementation that happened with fiscal year 22 for the same reason, is that for transparency of the true live asset and liability of leases versus purchases, so that the multi-year leases that we have are shown at the end of the year for the true value of what we actually owe. The same thing with these software agreements. If we have a 5-year agreement, annually we show the cost of the agreement. And once a year at the end of the year now, we will also have to show the full obligation that we have for the 5-year contract. So this is an add-on to the software to help us extract the data, test everything, and have it in one concise place where it will write the journal entries and the audit notes that we need at the end of each year, and to make sure we are tracking and reporting everything correctly.
So I already know the answer to this. This is totally separate from the software that you recently also purchased. For
Yes.
your department.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference?
The ClearGov software that was purchased for our department is related to the annual budgeting process. And this is related to recording and tracking expenses for software agreements and lease agreements. And this one software, when we add this function, will track all of our debt for us, and we will be able to report and show, on a daily basis where we stand as far as debt. Same thing with leases, which, we lease our police patrol vehicles through Enterprise, and then also to show every software agreement we have, what it cost us annually, and what the projections are out for each year.
Thank you. Questions or motions? Commissioner Fong.
Make a motion that recommend the town board authorize the town manager contract with the subscription-based information technology software. And approve the attached budget. $1,002.
Motion by Commissioner Fong, second by Commissioner Whitley, and approved. Further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Move on to item 10E, consider allocation of $50,000 state grant funds.
Sure, and thank you for Teresa for preparing this memo. So the board may recall that we put in some funding requests to our state legislators last cycle, and actually one of our friends in another county was kind of the spearhead on this. But ultimately, we were able to secure $50,000 in state grant funds. Within that funding request letter, we did list a number of items that we were hoping we might receive funding for. The allocation that we got from the state was really just for capital needs and equipment within the town. So it didn't specify which from our list or what we might specifically put it toward. State has now reached out and said that they would like to give us those $50,000 in funds, but they need us to tell them what we plan to put the money towards in order for them to release it. So our recommendation is that right along the lines of what Commissioner Whitley was mentioning earlier in the evening, we would suggest that we put the $50,000 towards the completion of the Emergency Operations Center at the police department. We also have about $40,000 in a WASI grant funding that is coming to us to help offset those costs. But we do think that this is needed. We've talked about it a lot, and this would be a project that we could move on in a timely manner to meet any requirements that the state might have. They have not been specific with us on how quickly we need to spend the funds, but we don't want them to stick around. So it's certainly board discretion if you would like to put them elsewhere, but that is our recommendation. That the board directs us to let the state know that we will be spending $50,000 on.
Commissioner Whitley.
I will second that.
Motion by Commissioner Whitley, second by Commissioner Capano, all in favor? All right, move on to the mayor's report. They have one thing, and I want to highlight again that Matthews Presbyterian Church tomorrow, we over 7:30 p.m. Rachel Great School session. Something about color.
Now, realize first in her life, she has a real close friend that she's working with color. I brought it to her attention. That's prompted her to write this. I think you'll be very pleased with the good reform that we put together. Matthews Presbyterian Church.
Right, so
I'm sorry. Could you repeat this, please? That was just my-
on item 12, town attorney's report. No report, man. Town manager's report.
No.
Get a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Moved by Commissioner Capano, second by Commissioner Whitley, all in favor? Aye.